Care Act. And from the opposite end of the spectrum, Maine Senator Susan Collins says she's also out.
Is there anything Republican leadership can do to get you to vote yes for this bill?
Certainly, there are steps that could be taken, but they would be major overhauls of the legislation. For example, if the provisions that completely overhaul the Medicaid program were dropped from the bill, that would be a great step in the right direction.
Just bring it up for a vote, for bringing it to the floor for discussion of amendments. Would you support that?
I would not at this point unless there are substantial changes in the bill.
Senator McConnell now has to corral every single other Republican senator into voting for this bill, including the so-called moderates who balked at the last version. And that includes Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, Rob Portman of Ohio, and, crucially, Dean Heller of Nevada, all of whom reportedly met with McConnell today. Joining me now, John Ralston, editor of the Nevada Independent, who has been covering Dean Heller. John, Dean Heller surprised a lot of people. During version 1.0, he came out and said, I cannot support this bill, and largely focused on the Medicaid cuts. Where do you think he is now?
Well, he is saying he's undecided on even getting to the debate on the so-called motion to proceed. He is saying that he's going to read the bill this weekend. But he knows what's in the bill, Chris, just as you and I know what's in the bill. And as you mentioned, it's not much change. And as Susan Collins talked about the Medicaid provisions, he is on the record firmly saying that he is not going to affect the 200,000 plus Nevadans who were covered under the Medicaid expansion. Then, as you know, Brian Sandoval, his friend and the governor, was the first Republican governor to expand Medicaid. They stood together at a press conference about 2 weeks ago and said the same thing. They will oppose this bill if it's going to kick these people off Medicaid. And Heller even went further, saying he will not support a bill that kicks tens of millions of Americans off of health care, and he does not appreciate the lying. He used that word, Chris, lying about premiums going down. He is so far out there that if he flips on this, it's going to be a real problem for him.
Yeah, I mean, you know, here's what you said. You said there's zero chance Sandoval against the governor, very popular, we should note, governor of that state, a Republican, is against the bill. Heller is for it. I want to play what Sandoval said today. Again, the core of the objection are the Medicaid cuts. That is the huge part of what the bill is doing budgetarily, and they're still there. Here's Sandoval today.
Do you still want Senator Heller to vote no on this?
Well, Senator Heller and I are in constant conversation, and obviously he's going to vote and make up his own mind. But I've told him all along that I'm very worried about those 210,000 people and, you know, the effect on the state budget.
Now, Heller is the only Republican up in the Senate in a Hillary Clinton state in 2018. What is he looking at politically?
Well, trouble, Chris. Now, I should say that he's been in big trouble before, and he has survived. He won by 12,000 votes in 2012 when he never should have won, in a year in which Obama won the state by 6 points. But he's gotten whipsawed here, Chris. First of all, he said repeatedly before that press conference that he needed to talk to the governor. Essentially, whatever the governor says is what I'll do. He essentially has ceded his vote to the governor on this at that press conference and before, and you saw what the governor said. There's no way that Sandoval can come out and support the bill as it exists now. So that's a real problem for him. Heller's numbers are worse in Nevada in some polling than Trump's. He's in the high 30s, low 40s approval rating. His problem, though, is that even if the political calculus is he can't change, he is going to get a primary opponent if he votes no.
Right.
In Nevada, the primary is in June. The turnout is very low. The base will turn out. And you have folks like you out there saying that if Heller votes no, that he's going to hemorrhage the base and that he's in big trouble. I think Heller will get a primary opponent if he votes no, and I think he has the potential to lose in a primary because the turnout's usually around 40% or so. So you can imagine, Chris, what percentage of that is the Republican base that could be enraged. Now, again, we're talking on July 13th, 2017 for an election that takes place a little under a year from now, but he has no safe harbor here.
It's a great point. He's also, we should note, he's got someone like by the name of Sheldon Adelson, the billionaire Nevadan GOP donor, who he's pretty close to and has given him a lot of money, who presumably wants him to vote yes here.
Both Sheldon Adelson and Steve Wynn, the other billionaire from Nevada, who by coincidence just happens to be the Republican National Committee's finance chairman now, have both hectored Heller about voting for this bill. They are ideologically supportive of what's going on. Steve Wynn has publicly said Obamacare, is the worst thing that ever happened in America, or words to that effect. Now, it may be a coincidence that both of those gentlemen stand to get a lot of money saved if this Obamacare is repealed, right, Chris, but they are both telling Heller to vote that way. Listen, I think it's facile to say that this is a choice between your donors and 200,000 people on Medicaid, and I don't know where Heller is really in his heart. I never try to read into politicians' hearts, but it's clear to me, based on what he has said publicly, that if he votes for this bill and it still contains the Medicaid cuts, that is going to be a devastating proposition for him.
Well, Nevadans, if you care strongly about this bill in either direction, you really want to see it become law, or you don't, you have a lot of power right now. You should let your senator know how you feel. John Ralston, thanks for joining me. Coming up, from there was no collusion to collusion isn't illegal to, well, it definitely wasn't treason. We'll talk about the lowering of expectations in wake of the Trump emails ahead. Plus, the president tells us what a lot of people don't know is tonight's Thing 1, Thing 2. Stay tuned.
The protesters built a barricade and refused to move